Hey, welcome to Guitar Knobs, the guitars, gear, noise, and nonsense podcast, hosted today by these knobs.
Aaron Cook.
Hefe. That's the first time you've ever called yourself Hefe. I love it.
I had to try.
That's what I call you. And me, Todd Novak, and also a guest knob.
I'm Chris Graham.
Visiting
by
us.
the alias Pistachio Gonzales when I'm trying to prank somebody.
Noted.
Craigslist.
Yes. If you get anybody...
Craigslist prankster.
Yes, Pistachio Gonzales. So,
Gonzales.
Chris is joining us again for... It's not really a part 2. Maybe it's just an extension.
I like extensions.
Yeah, that's a whole other...
I know you do too.
Oh, man. So an extension on our last talk where we kind of dipped into a few aspects of what he does. Chris, he's a music masterer.
A master music
Indeed.
masterer.
Music master?
Master Rumor.
A master of musics?
Indeed.
Okay. So we got a lot of questions for you. Two of us, Hefe.
Who has all the questions?
Hefe and Cookie are both really heavily into home recording.
I wouldn't say heavily.
Mediumly?
Okay,
Mediumly.
Okay, mediumly into more home recording aspects. I'm more into live setup. And I definitely want to know how, like, the things that you have learned from, we kind of touched on your history and how you got here. What might be worth touching on that one more time, and trying to discern how the things that you have gained from your knowledge, like how do they apply to people like me or like Cookie or Hefe or anybody else who is listening
broad.
who probably isn't a masterer or a professional sound engineer. How do the skills and the experience that you have, how can we apply that to what we might do in our home recording, what we might do in live setup, or how we might even just do it for hey, if you don't do any of those and you just like playing as a hobbyist, like what are some things that we can apply based on what you do to like regular Joe's guitars and gear?
Yeah, well, I think as far as the guitar conversation goes, I'm sure probably 70-80%, people that are listening that are guitar players probably have some sort of recording gear, or hobby, or their next door neighbor does, or the guy in their band does, or whatever. So I think if you don't, you should, because it definitely makes you a better player. It's difficult to play, think about playing, think about what you need to play next, and to evaluate, am I doing a good job at this? And maybe even singing at the same time. So
yeah, recording. I remember the first time I ever tracked bass or guitar. What an experience that was! Like my head was just in a different space altogether, and I sucked at it. I truly think that there's a skill at tracking guitar.
Oh, absolutely.
As a performer.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's
why you have session musicians, right?
Yeah.
No.
Well,
yeah, for other reasons.
Okay.
It's difficult, and I think the thing that I think it's important that you zoom out when you're recording and think about, why are you recording? What's the point of a recording? What's it for? And I think you got to answer that question first and foremost. And the point is to communicate with other people, whether you're trying to share an experience, whether you're trying to share an experience that you've had with them, or whether you're trying to, you have a message that you want to communicate to them, or you're telling a story or whatever. It's this thing that we do as humans that helps us relate to one another in an incredibly powerful and mysterious way. So when you're recording, I think the biggest thing that I see as a mastering engineer is there's only a couple mistakes, honestly, that I see them again and again and again. 99.9% of the mistakes that I see are all one of 3 or 4 or 5. And as I'm mastering, part of mastering is I'm taking a whole record, maybe 10 songs, and I'm making sure that when someone listens to that record, that it's been mastered and compressed and optimized in a way where someone can listen to it from front to back, from beginning of track 1 to the end of track 10, and they never leave the space that the record takes them, and that there's never any moment where, in film they call it the suspension of disbelief. So when you're listening to a record, it's sort of like watching a movie in that it takes you somewhere. And if it's not mastered well, you suddenly remember, oh, this is a recording, and that was kind of weird that they just did that, and that sounded kind of odd. I've left that world, and it's not pleasant. Nobody likes to do that, especially if you're listening with headphones, and you're kind of dead to the world. So what I noticed that a lot of people do is that they forget that the point of a recording is to communicate emotion. And they start getting so obsessed with, I'm going to tweak the guitars like this. I'm going to edit the drums like this. I'm going to do all these things and make it perfect and suck all the emotion out of it. And that sort of, I don't know if it's ego or the opposite of ego. I want it to be perfect. It's just intense when you put a recording out there in the real world.
It's a little bit of fear, really.
Oh, it's terrifying.
Yeah, because you've got a lot invested in that.
Yeah.
And the idea that you might put that out there and then have to make an apology for whatever. I'm going to do that. I'm going to get to that. Well, it's not quite. It's like, that's awful.
Right. It's a vulnerability. It's almost like being naked in public.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like posting a nude emotional photo. It's the emotional equivalent of a nude photo on the internet. And
I think Jeff has a lot of those.
But you're naked, and every single person that listens to it is going to have an opinion, or worse yet, they won't have an opinion because they don't care.
Yeah,
Indifference is
whatever
is crippling. Indifference as a musician, that's probably the most crippling thing that you can encounter.
Yeah,
even so much more than, like, if someone says they hate it, that means they at least listen to it and they have an opinion. And you can at least have a conversation. Yeah. But, oh, man, indifference. Oof.
It's tough.
Oh, yeah. Indifference is by far the worst.
Yeah.
Thanks for
but
we covered that.
We agreed
Cookie.
already. Minutes
I
ago.
might agree. I might not. I don't really know.
Are you saying that indifference is the worst?
I'm so confused now.
Let me continue. Is that, especially when you see indifference from your friends, like you share this recording.
How come you're looking straight at me?
That's like a kick in the nuts.
But they're
that nuts
right to your face, like
or the knobs.
It's really good.
Yes.
So that they're trying to stroke your ego. When it's like, dude, if you're indifferent, just own it. I would be much more comfortable with you owning your indifference than telling me, like, I think it's good.
It's good.
And you can see right through it.
Yeah.
At least that's me.
Yeah. It's terrifying. You show a buddy something you recorded, and they give you that sounds great, man.
Yeah, that's cool. That's good luck with that, man.
Awesome, dude.
Hope someone likes that.
Can we have so many areas to dive into. But can you give...
Wait, there's a couple more that I wanted to make sure we get back to, like, there's 3 or 4 things that...
Yeah, there is, but I want to make sure that whoever's listening who still doesn't know what a masterer is, a layman's definition of what that is and how that is different from a recording engineer or a mix
engineer. Yeah, so when you go to the studio, an audio engineer is the guy who's plugging the microphones in and turning stuff up and turning stuff down and pressing the little red button. He's the audio engineer. The mixing engineer is the guy that then goes back and turns every individual thing up and down at the right times and, makes it bassier, makes it more trebly, or, compresses it and makes it less dynamic so that the louder parts are closer to the quieter parts, or, whatever. Once it's been mixed, then it needs to be mastered. Mastered takes just the 2-track output of the entire recording and optimizes it using compression, multi-band compression, EQ, limiting, and a whole other bag of voodoo magic. And essentially the goal of the mastering engineer is to make sure that the recording sounds good everywhere, that it's portable. So the hardest thing to do in a mix is to make a mix that's portable, that sounds good in a variety of speakers. By far, it's the hardest thing. And the mastering engineer helps make sure it's portable, but they also try to bring out the soul of the song so that when you're listening back to the recording, that the intent and the emotion of the artist is presented in the most clear way. And the big thing there to keep in mind is that, I think we mentioned this in the last episode, is that most people that are doing home recording believe that making a professional recording means I'm going to record, mix, and master myself. And the final product, how it compares to commercial music, is how good I did. Not true. Every professional mix engineer worth his salt that's mixing hit records all over the world for the past 30 years is hiring somebody else to master it. They mix it, they bounce it down to a single stereo file for each song in 90% of the cases, and then they send that single file, in some cases it's a few files,
right,
to the mastering engineer, and then the mastering engineer puts that finishing touch on it. And one of the benefits of the mastering engineer as well is the scariest part of recording is clicking the upload button. You know, is all right, I'm committed to this, I'm putting it out there, and then I'm going to wait and see if anyone comments on the Facebook page or whatever. A mastering engineer is the last line of defense to say, bro,
This is garbage.
you might want to
Start over.
you might want to adjust that, or wow, your bass is so loud, or wow, your vocals are so quiet, because you're so self-conscious about your recording.
Right.
And for a mastering engineer, you know, any mastering engineer that is making a career out of it is doing at least an album a day, you know, probably 5 days a week. So, you know, because guys that master for a living do this all day, they can spot a record that could be subtly improved, and whether they're doing the subtle improving through mastering, or whether they're saying, hey, before we do this, you might want to turn the vocal up a little bit, or you might want to use a high pass filter on your vocals.
So that's interesting in the idea that you listen to so much different types of music. Some of it could be complete garbage, and some of it could be complete beautiful, amazing
absolutely
stuff.
Yeah.
Do you ever decline certain type of things, or do you ever tell the person that it's not very good? Do you put any bias on that?
Never decline a client for their art. For their content, if I think it's something that is socially destructive, I do turn those people down, and I hate it. It's super awkward.
Yeah.
Like Kanye.
Well, Kanye-esque.
Stone-faced.
I said I wasn't going to, but that was a perfect opportunity.
It's the second one.
Okay, that's it.
But yeah, if it's like, you know, advocating
just
weird
stuff that's not
types of
that you're
violence
not-
and stuff.
Enter your own whatever disturbs you into the blank.
Yeah, so, you know, if that happens, I'll politely say, I'm sorry, I can't put my name on this. Because it puts my name on it, and then I'm out there and kind of sort of maybe conceivably endorsing it. So and helping them spread it, because it sounds better now.
Right.
And it's going to be a little more commercially successful.
I have I want to know
Sexful.
our goal to be sexful.
I don't master any songs with sexfulness in them. So.
No, you need a Rhodes piano for that. Hey. Inside joke. So, okay, in the scenario that you say, wow, this needs this adjustment, or, you know, you've got a list of things that you need to do. If it's something that there's the sound engineer, the artist, I'm assuming there's a producer involved. Sometimes has all said, check, 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 send it to the master, and you say, whoa, wait a minute. At that point, do you gather everybody back around? Do you just do it?
Well,
or who's the point on that?
What I do is anytime somebody sends me a project, I have like a web form that I have them fill out. And one of the questions is, do you want my feedback before we get started? Because there's always going to be occasions when it's like, we are crazy and we booked our CD release show and it's in 2 days and we're sending you we're pulling a Kanye. See what he just did on Dream Title.
Oh man.
Yeah.
You know? So
he's gonna appear now instead of 3 times.
3 times. So there's definitely, I ask straight up, do you want my feedback? And almost everybody says yes to that. Sometimes it's just technical stuff, or your music is too loud and it's clipping and causing distortion, and hey, this is an easy thing to fix. Sometimes it's hey, your vocal's a little too quiet, or hey, Well, let me back up. Let me bring this back kind of towards the kind of home recordist, hobbyist. Most of the time, when I'm getting a project that's recorded at home, which is more and more and more, as far as the music industry goes, the biggest place of growth, I don't know why this isn't in any articles I've read, hands down is in the home studio world. Mm-hmm. Hands down. There are millions and millions of dollars, maybe billions, being spent on home recording stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It is growing like crazy.
Gear, apps,
plugins,
it's cheaper and easier
software,
to do.
Yeah, computers, everything. So as a mastering engineer, it's a good time to be a mastering engineer right now. And the biggest thing that I notice for people that are just starting out is I would say 4 times out of 5 when I get a project like this where it's their first record and they're trying to mix it themselves, it's not that they didn't do enough in the mix. It's that they did way too much.
Yeah.
Way too much. And all the times, especially on vocals, I'll say, hey, would you send me a screenshot of your EQ? And they'll be like, oh, I boosted, 79 dB at 10K, and then I cut 1,000 dB at 9K, and just these really aggressive, moves, when they're trying to eat, particularly with EQ.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the biggest things that I see that holds kind of the hobbyist back. I've got a guitar, I've got a recording interface, maybe I've got GarageBand or Logic or, whatever. I'm making some music. And then they just get so obsessed, they don't really know what they're doing, so they do more of it,
right?
In the hopes that that will make it better.
Yep,
it's a huge learning curve to try to figure out all that stuff.
Yeah.
Doing it.
Well, there's in recording, there's what's called a I'm going to say it wrong. I'm having a brain fart. Backcell EQ curve, and essentially it's what was used on like every record up until the 70s or so. And it's very gentle. And when you EQ something and it's not gentle, you can kind of imagine just a very gentle slope. Just sort of goes up a little bit. There's no like sharp angles or pointy lines up and down. That sounds better because on an EQ, 99% of them, 90% of them or so, when you're aggressive with the EQ, you get resonances.
Yeah.
And that ends up sounding really bad.
Explain that a little bit for us.
So, it's like a cup, there's like at a certain frequency that just sort of rings.
It comes that annoying sound that you hate.
Oh, yeah.
There it is.
In every frequency.
Bring it back. Yeah. So I was working on a record this morning. I do like a mix consultation for people that want it when they're working on when I'm mastering a record for them. And this guy he's recorded a song that he wants to have mastered, and he was using 2 EQ plugins on his vocals.
Wait, on the same track?
On the same track. And he's doing like different... Precisely. So my advice immediately was be much more gentle, delete one of the plugins, do the EQ with one plugin, and just don't go... Like, you can't say, I don't really like this resonance in my voice, I'm going to EQ it out. It doesn't work that way.
That's a good point.
And a lot of people think that it's more surgical than it is.
Right.
And even if it was as surgical as a lot of people would like to believe... If you don't know what you're doing,
they're using the wrong type of EQ.
Yeah, just be gentle. So, one of the biggest things I notice in people that are just kind of starting out and recording themselves is that they're extremely aggressive.
So that's number 2.
This is number 2. Let me think of some more here.
If you don't have them, that's fine.
Oh, I do.
Okay.
I do. The big thing.
While he's thinking of it, I want to ask you a question.
Go ahead.
I'm super curious about. So you're probably getting a lot of mixes. Like, hey, I'm a home recording guy. I want you to master this album for me. And so here's 12 tracks. And all of them have different different characteristics of the mix.
Yes.
How do you deal with that?
Well, luckily, it's not as much of an issue as you would think it would be.
Okay.
Thank God. So the hardest thing as a mastering engineer is when somebody's mixed a record and every song is mixed totally different. And each song has unique issues. One song has a really, really bright vocal, and the other has a really, really dark vocal, and the other has, a really, really harsh acoustic guitars, and the other has really cloudy, murky, boomy acoustic guitars. So usually what I'll do in a situation like that is I'll find a song that sounds good in the record and say, hey, this song sounds pretty good. What did you do there that's different than the other songs? And use that as a spot where they can work backwards. And instead of you don't encounter these people very often, but there are some people who just want to do something different and aggressive differently every time that they do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as a mastering engineer, it definitely makes my life easier if the mixes are consistent. And a lot of times, even if they aren't great, but if they are consistent, I'm happy.
What do you consider consistent?
Consistent is that when I listen to it from song to song to song, the vocals all sound about the same.
Okay.
The guitars all sound about the same. The drums all sound about the same. It's not like one song's and the other song's.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, the consistency
So
thing.
is it more of timbre of instrument or the track versus the plugins, or?
A lot of time it's just people not knowing how to use an EQ and thinking, and they'll sit there and they'll make a small adjustment, and then they'll twiddle around with the song for an hour, then they'll make another small adjustment, and then another small adjustment, and then 2 hours later or 2 weeks later they add a little bit more. And through this process, they're not listening to other music from bands that sound good through their monitors in their studio, and they completely lose context of
sight of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and so those are the two big issues. They've either lost context of how their speakers actually sound, and that's an EQ resonating
there it is
in the background. That
spike.
I'm having fun here at the board.
But anyways, there's a
cleaning crew.
Keep going.
Anyways, so they'll. I lost my train of thought.
It's all right. We'll continue.
Consistency.
Gentle pants.
Consistency, gentle pants. So they'll either go in and be super aggressive. Oh man, I had such a good thing to say.
It was going to be amazing.
I know.
That was the point number 3.
Damn it.
That dang. But they'll either go in and be really aggressive in the mix. Oh, okay. Here we go. All right.
Yes.
So there it is. We can edit that out later. That's possible with audio recording, right? Anyways. So what they'll either do is they'll not be listening to music that they know what it sounds like. So say you're doing a folk record and you're not listening, and you love James Taylor and you're not listening. You should listen to James Taylor in between mixing sessions to get an idea of what sounds good.
Start comparing what you're doing to what other people do.
It can be incredibly humiliating, and
that kind of applies to any creative process, though.
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
We're all in the creative field
Yeah.
across the table here, and that
you have to have
right
a good frame of
point.
reference, and you also so you have to keep that in mind. And people fail to do that very often when they're beginning out.
I'm actually pretty bad at that. I will admit.
Most people are.
Yeah.
The second thing is that people will very often not only lose reference, not have a frame of reference in the studio, but they'll lose a frame of reference of how their recording will sound outside of the studio. So all the time I'll get people that are like, I spent $400 on these flat monitors, the flat frequency response, so that my mixes will be flat. And I'm kind of flat. It doesn't exist. If you're wearing a T-shirt versus no shirt, that changes the frequency response of your mixing environment. If your hair is long versus shaved, that changes the frequency response. If you're wearing a hat, that dramatically changes it. Glasses dramatically change it. So anyways, I'm nerding out here. The point being is that what people will do is not check their mixes outside of the studio. If you haven't checked your mixes outside of the studio, unless you are really experienced as a mix engineer, you've made a bad mix.
So like take it out to your car.
Take it out to your car.
How's it sound in the car?
Yeah.
That boom box I still have upstairs.
Totally.
Yeah.
As many speakers as you can get. And what I always recommend, especially for people starting out, is they'll be like, I'm going to sell my monitors and get nicer monitors. And my recommendation is always, don't sell your monitors. Whatever you do, don't sell your monitors.
Get more.
Get more monitors.
That's what I tell my wife. I need more speakers.
You do need more speakers.
That's what I tell your wife, too.
Yeah. That's good. As long as we're ganging up on it, it's fine.
Oh, my. Back to the recordings.
Anyways.
Yeah, so the more speakers that you check it in, the more sure. Because here's the thing. When you're making a recording, from a technology standpoint, what's the point? So it would sound good to everybody. Mm-hmm. But everybody's listening in very different environments with probably very, very different equipment. So a good question is, does your recording sound good in Apple iPod headphones?
Right.
If it doesn't, there's a lot of people that are not going to like how your record sounds. Mm-hmm. So you probably should check on that. Does it sound good in, if this were the mid-90s, does it sound good in a Bose surround sound system? Okay, yes, it sounds good there. If you can get your mix to sound good in a variety of environments through a variety of speakers, it's probably a good mix. And
so okay, with that logic, I mean, in almost anything else that we would apply that logic to, it would then become vanilla ice cream. It wouldn't have any characteristic that you lock onto. And I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying, like, if you applied a common mentality to that argument, it would mean that everything would just be flat and nothing, and you know. Well,
not necessarily. I think the issue here is you can imagine. You know, I know with graphic design. Mm-hmm. If you can imagine, you know, for us, basically everybody has an iPhone, mm-hmm. and their screen looks basically about the same, and the colors are going to render basically about the same. Yeah. In audio, it's not like that at all. It would be like as if
it's actually not. We face the same issue completely. So I 100% agree with you on that. I'm looking to elaborate on the argument of why that isn't actually a bad thing to to maybe normalize that.
Gotcha.
Right? You know what I'm saying?
Well, the big issue is that whether you want to think about this or not when you're recording, is that the way people perceive your music is going to have a lot to do with the average of how every speaker system it's going to be listened to mm-hmm. sounds. So, and that comes back to this portability issue that we brought up before. If the mix doesn't sound good on giant club speakers, on iPhone speakers, on a MacBook, on iPod headphones, on, you know, whatever, right, then it's not a good mix. And the reason they pay the big bucks to the guys that mix professionally is because they tend to be better at making mixes sound better in a wider variety of...
Sorry, this EQ is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Dude, the guy's killing me right now. But... I don't know.
He's not actually hacking. He's on his phone right now.
That's a different...
that's not him. Hang on. We're going to pause just for 1 second.
And we're back.
Sorry, we had some interruptions there. But so I'm just going to ask a question to bring this back to the home studio folks. So you've taken the time, you spent, you know, a couple weeks, couple months, hopefully not a couple days, creating, this couple tracks. And you're ready to get them out on your channel of choice out into the interweb, or even just, you know, old school on a disc or something, and you just want to get it to people.
Cassette.
Hey, yeah. Making a comeback.
Let's do it.
So your next step, I think, for most people would just be cool, upload it. But anybody that has done those home recordings knows inherently there's something off, and going back to that vulnerability standpoint, you know that you're going to have to make some apologies, couch it somehow, say, well, it's still not right?
It's an extra layer on top of the art that you created. You messed up the production of your art.
Right. But the general person doing this at home, the you or the me or anybody that's listening, I don't think that their next step is, man, I have to contact a masterer to do this. So what in your, like, what is your advice on how we would proceed with that?
I'll address that in 2 ways, maybe 2.5 ways. So first of all, most mastering engineers that are on the lower end of the spectrum and the middle and the upper middle end of the spectrum as far as price-wise will almost certainly do a free sample for you. My advice is, if you have no intention of hiring them, is that you still ask for a free sample. And then at least you know, okay, that's what
it's supposed to say.
That's a reference.
It's a reference. Masterers around the world are...
Yes and no. Here's the catch. My business model as a mastering engineer is the drug dealer business model. Mm. If I give you a free taste, you're probably going to buy a lot of product from me. So, and that's every mastering engineer's business model for the most part, unless you're crazy established and your reputation.
That's Aaron's dating business model too, right?
Free samples.
Free samples. So I would say do that. Even if you don't intend to hire somebody, just Google mastering. If you Google Chris Graham mastering.
Plug-a-roni.
That's a
Love that
great
meat.
thing to do. And even if you don't think you want to have your record mastered professionally, a lot of people end up doing it after they hear it and say, wow, I didn't know it could sound that good.
Right.
Second thing, and I would also recommend that you send it to as many mastering engineers as you have time to. Send it at least to a few. Some are really bad. Some are really good. Some are really expensive and really bad. Some are really expensive and really good, and all stripes in between. So I would say do that. Let's say you are in an environment where you are absolutely not comfortable with asking for a free sample or whatever. I would say surely you have a few buddies that also record music. I would say go to them. Let's say you got 3 buddies. Give them each the WAV file or the AIF or whatever and say, hey, I'd like each of you to master my song, and I'll master it too, and we're going to do a blind shootout and see who does the best
that's
job.
really cool.
Yeah.
When you master yourself, I would be shocked, unless you are much smarter than your friends, if yours will be the best. Just on bias alone, it's so hard to know what to do when it's your own music and your own mix and your own
That's
master.
interesting because you're going to have your own natural bias because you spend so much time doing that, and you're going to say, wow, that one sounded better, or not, because that's not what I was trying to get.
Yeah.
That's not what I was after.
Well,
So you got to
even-
be super humble in that as
Yeah,
well.
and that's the point, is that it brings you back to reality here. And the problem with that, here's the catch, is there's a saying in the recording industry: you never finish a record, you give up. And
Right.
it's very, very,
Or you run out of
very
money.
true. Or you run out of money. And it's very, very, very true for people that record at home. And sometimes when you do a buddy shootout, you might have a situation where you get a little too much feedback, and that stalls you out and steals the wind out of your sails and crushes you emotionally. And
Well, it's good to have at least an
Let it
agreement
cry.
with those people, because I think the other natural reaction to whenever you put any kind of work that is subjective in nature in front of anybody, and we know this based on our profession,
I'm sure
their knee-jerk reaction is, in order for my next step is I have to have input. I have to, whether it's out of authority, whether it's out of a contractual agreement, and thereby doing more than is necessary in most cases.
Yes.
So we've all suffered. Everybody at this table suffered from that, and I think so. I would say if you do have those friends, like have a standing agreement of being gentle, I guess, with that approach.
Back to the pants.
Back to the pants.
Gentle pants.
Yeah, somebody's gonna make those and send them to you. Now. It's gonna be amazing.
I might buy
Maybe you
some,
should
buy some sweatpants and then screen print.
nice
Something
gentle.
in my mind, it was embroidered.
Yeah,
I don't do embroidery. I do screen printing.
embroidered
Okay, there it is,
embroidered cutouts to be even more specific. But anyway, so my point is that if you have that common trust group and you know each other's ears and you know each other's taste in music, then there isn't the necessary need, whether it be ego or fear of not doing enough or doing it better, that is going to complicate that. So
Totally.
if I give it to Aaron, or if I give it to Jeff, or if I give it to you, I understand that you guys are going to do what's necessary, not anything more.
We're not going to hurt you.
And an effort
We're not gonna
to
harm
just
you.
say, I think this is going to make it sound better. It may not even be the end result. But if I give my track to you three, and then all three of you have some different things going on, but collectively you guys all drop the bass out of my track for whatever reason, then it's like, okay, clearly I need to address that.
Yep. You will learn.
Yeah.
From the experience.
That's a really great idea.
Yeah.
And most people, I think it's probably safe to say, somebody, if you're playing music, somebody else is playing music too. And as you were saying, if you are playing music in this day and age, you're probably doing a computer home recording or something like that. They are as well.
Yep.
Yeah, that's I think that's good, solid advice there from you. I wasn't saying that You know
Good
what I
job.
mean?
Way to go. I like your
Well,
thoughts.
there's a trick that I learned when I first got into audio. Going back to the thing of people just want to have input,
Exactly.
so they can feel better about themselves, and it's not necessarily good. And a good artist knows how to balance that. And so there's, I guess, maybe two stories with it. When I was first getting into audio, I had a gig doing sound at a coffee shop. And people would say...
Riveting.
Yamaha.
Riveting. And it was a nice coffee shop. It had a great PA system, huge board with lots... We even had 8 channels of compression
Jeez.
in this coffee shop. The guy was a studio owner, and he was awesome. And he was my mentor. And he said, now, when someone says to you, hey, could you add some more highs to my voice? Reach up to the board, pretend to grab the knob, and pretend to turn it, and then say, how's that?
Oh, yeah.
100% of the time, the person will say, oh, it's so much better. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And it goes back to this idea. And I think it was Da Vinci had the same issue. And he was, with the Medicis, he had, Patreon. What's the word I'm looking for? A patron who would pay him to make the art. And they'd walk in when he was making a sculpture, and he would say, oh, he would stand at the Medicis or whatever would stand underneath the sculpture, this huge man, and would look up at it and say, oh, his nose looks too big. And I'm like, of course his nose looks too big. You're underneath him. And Da Vinci would walk up, and he would just kind of grab a little bit of dust in his hand, and then take the chisel up, put it next to the nose, and go and hit it, and go tink, tink, tink.
Let some dust fall.
And then let some dust fall right on the Medicis below them. And then he would say, how's that look? And they would go, oh, so much better. That's awesome.
I love that story.
And so, yeah, I mean, that's definitely, I think when you're making great art, you have to balance. That's
Other
so
people's
hard.
opinions
So hard.
That's good. I wish we had a way
Good
to actually
job.
do that in a more
Marketing and advertising sense.
Not that we do that full time, or maybe we do. I'm not sure, but yeah, that's a little tougher to do in our biz. But safe to say, I think we've all tried ways of doing that. But that makes a lot of sense. So, real quick, how if you're taking the approach of, okay, I'm going to do my best to get this done right. What and that you're probably not going to be able to afford some top line master or mastering engineer. Are there any steps that you can take to actually get the right gear, get the right plugins? Like what's some advice around that?
Yeah, well,
The gear.
totally. So I would say if you are mastering your own music or you're mastering your buddies, the first choice you need to make as a mastering engineer is, how am I going to approach the loudness war? Mm-hmm. Is loudness more important than great art, or is great art more important than loudness? And obviously, a really good mastering engineer is going to be able to give you both to some degree. And it depends, on the genre and the mix and all that. I would say that if you're mastering your own music, be gentle. Don't go for loudness. Don't crush it. Don't try to make it as loud as the CDs you listen to. And just remember, if you spent $200 on your audio interface and $200 on your mic, and you got $1,000 or a couple $1,000s worth of gear, the people you're competing with probably a team of at least 6 people, each person specialized in whatever particular role they have, who does nothing but this all day long and has for years, and has so much gear and so much specialized tools. So I would say just be gentle. And it's not very difficult to make a decent master that's really, really, really quiet.
Like how quiet on a...
Considerably quieter than commercial levels.
Like under -3
well,
dBs or...
He's asking because he's been fighting this loudness war over the last couple of days.
Maybe.
Well, that's the thing, is I would say just recognize the question you have to ask yourself if you're a professional mastering engineer. I sit down to a project, how am I going to approach the loudness war? Am I going to try to squash this and make it super loud, or am I going to try to move more towards an artistic? I want people to weep when they hear this, and they won't weep if it's crushed. And so get a limiter, get a decent limiter, put it as the last plug-in in your chain, and get it so you're seeing a little bit of gain reduction. That little meter that goes backwards. Yeah. Just get that to kiss. So just 1, 2, 3 dB of gain reduction.
Don't
just get a little bit of that. And that's going to get it up to, it's at least going to hit 0. 0 is the loudest you can be in digital audio. And I would probably pull it back so it's hitting like -1, or excuse me, like -0.1, -0.2. Pretty much everything I master is mastered to peak at -0.3. Wow. That gives me a little bit of room, even if something crazy is going on in the audio where there's not going to be as much inner sample clipping when it gets converted. So just be gentle, don't be too aggressive, and have a shootout with pros and your buddies.
What if we tried to play the loudness war with our mix, and so we hand the stuff over to you, and we have not given you much headroom? Do you have to do?
That's one of the questions I ask is, do you want my feedback? And if they're clipping their mix, if their mix, goes way past 0, then I'll definitely say something about that. Or if they've taken a bunch of limiters and put them on each individual track and crushed them all individually, and it just looks like a sausage is the
waveform
is the technical term. It's slightly tapered at the ends and flat in the middle.
That's
awesome. Is that actually what they call it, or they call it something else?
That's cool.
They call it, yeah. So be gentle, and just keep in mind the fact that we can, in our basements, bedrooms, dorm rooms, garages, make something that can be uploaded to the internet and be disseminated across the face of the globe instantaneously for almost no money is just effing cool.
It's incredible.
It changed my world back. I remember getting GarageBand. I'm like, this is awesome. Because I had I had a zip disk digital working station. I had an 8-track cassette recorder.
People just said, what?
Exactly. But I mean, it's like when that came along, completely changed
everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so case in point is who's the guy?
I had a zip disk.
The Superman, that rapper. What's his name?
You were asking the wrong crowd, brother.
Anyways, there's a rapper that had a really famous song like 2 years ago, and what's his name? Soulja Boy. Soulja Boy downloaded.
Still don't know.
Yeah, I know.
Anyways, it's not good music, but anyways, he downloaded. I think it was a cracked version or a free demo version of Fruity Loops. FL Studio is what it's called. Fruity Loops or FL Studio is the brand name. And he used all the stock plugins and all the stock samples and used that to record himself. And he made a hit record with that.
So it can be done.
It can be done. It is done. Bon Iver did basically the same thing a couple years ago.
So it's not about how it's
old house in Minnesota, off on a lake by himself.
So it comes back to capturing the essence of the song.
Yeah.
And the song resonates with people.
Yeah.
So that's what it comes down to. No matter how it is actually finally processed and put together, if there is magic in there somewhere, someone resonates with it.
Just don't ruin the magic is what I'm advising.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing that I run into the most with people that are doing it DIY is they do too much and they ruin the magic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Be gentle. Don't use too much EQ. Don't use too much compression. Just kiss it just a little bit. If you see it move on the gain reduction meter with the compressor, just leave it at that. Move on. Don't try to get too crazy. Don't worry about making it loud. Just make sure that it's compelling art.
I want to touch on what Aaron said real quick. I think the headroom point was a big one, and I think when you're first starting out and you're recording, and you hit record and you start seeing your file like load up, and you hit the guitar, and then you see the spikes go. The first reaction is you want to get those spikes as tall as you can so that they're touching. And again, this is not obviously for somebody who spends a lot of time recording, but probably first starting out, or I mean, maybe even if you've just never been told otherwise, the object isn't to get the spikes to just touch the top. It's to, have very few or make it very slender spike range, right?
Yeah, and that's a lie that's sort of, there's a very pervasive lie that surrounds that that's sort of on its way out. 5 years ago, this was much different. But the world that we grew up in, the analog world, you had to get healthy signal in the studio or it sounded terrible.
Yeah.
There was a very limited area on analog tape that you wanted to hit that sounded great. If it was too loud, it distorted like crazy. If it was too low, it was super hissy and thin. With digital, if you hit the top, you're dead. You're killing the audio and it's distorting. If you're way too low, you're probably still fine. So way better to err on the side of being gentle and recording too quietly than it is to record too loud. That being said, better preamps and better gear make a big difference, particularly with that. So we're using an M audio interface, that's very popular right now. There's a company called Apogee who makes something called the Duet. That's extremely popular and fantastic.
Yeah.
The Duet sounds better. It's about $600 or $700 for 2 channels. The Duet sounds better today than most super high-end gear sounded 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's
crazy.
Fantastic. And it's super low noise. And it's funny, like I'll get these college kids sometimes that'll send me a record they did in their dorm room on a Duet. And then the next day I'll do a record from a pretty decent studio that hasn't updated their gear in 10 years. And the Duet guy's record sounds better. And I'm like, oh my God, what a world.
Focusrite's another one that's pretty popular, like consumer. You have one of those at home.
I have a Focusrite.
The Scarlett is super popular right
one
now.
I have. Yeah.
Very, very popular.
And way easy to get into from a price point. And,
Well, I'd say if you're looking to make a better recording, better preamps and better converters, which most of the time in a small studio are the same thing, they're part of the interface, makes a big difference. The Universal Audio Apollo Twin is spectacular. It's like $600-$700. The Apogee Duet, which is about the same, is spectacular. It's about the same price. Apogee makes a smaller, what's it called, solo or
I think it's solo,
something like that. It's just a single channel, but their converters, what actually takes the analog signal from your microphone, or well, technically from your preamp, and converts it to digital, are wildly better than less expensive interfaces, and that makes a huge difference. If you A/B'd that, you would never, ever, ever use an inexpensive converter ever again. They're just spectacular. And the preamp on the Apogee and on the UAD are both great in that you can get great tone anywhere on the knob. On a less expensive preamp, you do need to push it. It's not the converter or the volume of the signal in digital that's the issue. It's whether the preamp's in the sweet spot. Nicer modern preamps like on the Apogee Duet don't have nearly as much of a sweet spot as some of in the late 80s and early 90s, everybody used the Mackie mixing boards.
Yep.
You got to gain stage those just right and get the preamp in just the right spot, and they sound much better when they're gain stage properly than they do when they're not gain stage properly. On something like the Apogee Duet, you just turn it up and it sounds fantastic. It doesn't matter if it's almost clipping or if you're 30 dB away from clipping.
Gain staging is a whole nother conversation.
Oh my gosh. So, but you could add that to this conversation of simple gear.
It's true.
Can make it easier to focus on the emotion, and that's one of the things that I love about the Apogee Duet. They don't pay me or anything. They're fantastic, but it's one knob.
Yeah.
And you
versus
turn it
4 knobs.
Yeah, you push it.
4 knobs.
Yeah, 4 knobs.
Okay, so quick question for you. Is there, so when you're talking about like, okay, on our typical song, let's say you've got some sort of drum track, whether that is electronic drums from a set. So like I have an Alesis set at my house. I go right into GarageBand with that. I have my bass. I got vocal, got good microphones, and guitars. When we're talking about making sure that, you know, we're not creating too great of a signal to where we're getting clipping. If we are up there, or let's not say clipped, but we've got a pretty strong signal or even a really weak one, is there one of those instruments that tends to suffer more as a result of that?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, vocals, there's a little distortion on a guitar. If it clips a little bit, people might think it's on purpose.
Right.
On a vocal, probably not. On a bass, definitely not. You know, so on a bass is hard to record. And if you're clipping or you're getting close to clipping and just clipping occasionally, you're going to hear that. Mm-hmm. And the thing about bass, the way the human ear works, if I played a low E on a bass guitar, I would need, I'm not even sure, 2, 3, 4, 5 times more actual energy, joules of energy, for the human ear to hear that at the same volume of, say, the high E on a guitar.
Wow.
You just blew our mind with joules.
So you have to, when you're mixing, the bass is just much, much louder. Mm-hmm. Because our ears need it to be so for us to hear it at an appropriate level.
Because it's a lower frequency.
Yeah, so that can create some strange isms in mastering, you know, in particular,
right.
Or mixing.
Bass seems to be the hardest thing to control and
100%.
contain and make sound right.
That's the most energy.
That's the one I find myself compressing the most when I'm tracking.
Well, it's the dynamic, at least my opinion as a musician, is the dynamics on a bass are very hard to control.
Yeah.
You know, much harder than on a guitar.
But when we're talking about taking that into GarageBand, so like if you're not live micing a bass amp and you're using the bass modules in GarageBand, which is, you know, typically what I'll do because I don't have a good bass rig at home. If I'm doing that, 100%, like it is so hard to go to dial in the sound that I actually want, even with all those variables. And I've always found that to be strange. So what you're, you know,
well, I would say there's two things you can do when you're recording. You can sound good, or you can sound unique. Mm. And very often, unique is better because you don't have to have a specific tone. If it sounds a little funny on purpose, that's awesome. And when we think about amazing records, were the Beatles good or were they unique? At the time, they were probably both, you know, but they were definitely unique. And you talk about like, you know, you say you want a revolution. Right. That guitar was crazy.
Yeah.
You know?
Didn't they actually like cut the speaker or something?
I think so. Yeah. That guitar was crazy. So did it sound good?
That was the Kinks.
I think you're right.
Kinks cut up their speakers with the razor blades.
Bass, yeah. Or Motown, you know, boom, 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 boom. Those are weird sounding recordings. You know, if you had never heard those before, you'd be like, what is going on here? These are strange, but they're awesome and they're unique. And there's a certain appeal to different. And Bon Iver, case in point. Who the hell had ever sounded like that when Bon Iver put out that first record? Or Sufjan Stevens, when he put out his first record, you know, that he recorded with terrible equipment in his room. It sounded unique. Mm. So I think
there's a perceived authenticity about lo-fi-ness.
Yeah,
you know.
Well, and that could manifest itself in lo-fi, or it could manifest itself in just a really strange sounding guitar. Yeah, or a really strange sounding the Bee Gees. You know. Staying alive. You know, there's.
Oh, we love them.
Yeah, no, we knew what you meant.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, you can argue about whether they're good or not, but they're unique, and that's definitely had a big impact on why they were compelling.
Okay.
So let me just grab this real quick. So I think what I'm saying is it's so much easier to make a great sounding unique recording than it is to make a great sounding recording that's got, you know, the exact same bass tone that James Jamerson uses for Motown and the same Stevie Ray Vaughan electric guitar Strat tone. You know, like when you're trying to get these perfect tones emulating certain artists, that is crazy hard.
Right.
To come up with a unique, it's almost impossible. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you come up with unique tones and you make your song kind of weird,
Be yourself.
Be yourself.
Yeah.
I think that speaks to people more. There's an inherent message of it's okay for me to be different, and people freaking love that. I freaking love that.
But as an artist, that it can be totally crippling, because when you do something and you're like, in my head, I think it's going to sound great like this. But then you hear it and you're like, that doesn't sound like stuff that I'm familiar with. And I think it doesn't make you a less artistic person.
Yeah.
It just means that you have a bit of a barrier in front of you that, isn't allowed, it may not allow you to be as instantly free of that.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think the important thing to remember is if you're emulating other artists, let's say you love Radiohead, you know what Tom York is doing? He's trying to make weird sounds.
Right.
So if you want to emulate Tom York, don't emulate the songs or the sounds that Tom York is making. Emulate the fact that Tom York is trying to find a unique voice.
Yeah.
And
totally.
name a musician that's freaking awesome and that is universally believed to be so, that's not doing that.
Yeah.
Like everyone, that's
sage advice.
Yeah, be weird, and your recordings will be significantly better as a result of it.
Word.
Cool.
All right. Well, I mean, we can't. That's a good place to land right there. It's inspiring. I mean, it makes me want to go home and play tonight. So that's cool. Dude, I so appreciate you swinging by and doubling up on this. We'll for sure have you back.
That sounds great.
And much thanks. And I guess we'll put your link
Cool
in the Facebook forum. I said forum again.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you said zip file, so ease up on that.
We're aging ourselves.
Zip disk. Yeah, those purple things were awesome.
And my SideQuest drive back in the day
had over 150 megabytes.
All right. These knobs are done.
All right.
Oh, that's it for these knobs. Please join us on Facebook.com/groups/guitar knobs and tell us what you think and share your stories and guitar stuff along with ours. You can also find us at twitter.com/guitar_knobs and also at our website at guitarknobs.podbean.com.